Hello, welcome to the March 2023 episode of the Distance Learning Roundtable on the Incandescent Radio Network and Incandescent TV. I'm Hope Katz-Gibbs, producer of the show that brings together educators to discuss the future of online education. It's an honor to introduce you to the show's hosts, Pat Cassella, the Executive Director of the U.S. Distance Learning Association, and Dean Hoke, Managing Partner of the international consulting firm Edu Alliance. We know you are going to learn a ton from today's guests. Kate and Joe are the authors of the best-selling book, Commencement, the Beginning of a New Era in Higher Ed. So Dean and Pat, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Well, thank you, Hope. Kate Colbert is a former higher education insider. You were an insider? You're still an insider. I know you. And a current world-renowned marketing expert. She develops college and university brand stories that are meaningful to the prospective student. She has overseen brand and enrollment marketing, public relations, and alumni relations at 2 Chicago area graduate schools. Kate has additional expertise in corporate education, university crisis management, and faculty relations. She serves as a faculty member in a number of higher education institutions in the Chicago area. Pat?
Thanks, everybody. I would like to introduce Dr. Joe Sallustio. Sallustio.
Well done.
He's one of our nation's foremost higher education experts. He's led a broad range of educational institutions in various sectors of higher education. Currently serves as the Senior Vice President of Lindenwood Global at Lindenwood University. Joe is a senior consultant to the Association of Governing Boards of Universities and Colleges, and also a frequent speaker and moderator at higher education conferences. He's also the co-founder and host of America's leading higher education podcast, the Ep6 Experience. Welcome, Kate and Joe. Delighted to have you with us today. And we're going to alternate some questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Dean for our first question.
Very good. Well, Kate and Joe, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
Kate, I'm going to kind of start with you, and then I'm going to ask Joe to also pitch in on this answer. Let's start with the book. Let's start with the book Commencement, the Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education. Been reading the book, haven't gotten through it all yet, but it's fascinating. I mean, the interviews seem to be with well over 100 different university presidents and senior people across the country. I'm very curious about the motivation in writing the book. And Kate, why don't we start with you, and then Joe, I'd like you to take over from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we'll let Joe jump in after I say a few words, because boy, he's the guy who's talked to anybody who's anybody in higher education. But what was the motivation behind writing the book? I think if we had to sum it up, I would say what drove us to write a really honest, inspired, kind of no holds barred kind of book about the future of higher education was love and sadness. And I say that because Joe and I both really love higher education, right? So we've consumed it. There's a lot of degrees between the two of us. We have supported it as alumni and community members and donors, and we've created it working inside and on behalf of higher education as higher education leaders. But we also have a lot of skepticism, and we wanted to have a really honest conversation about things that are sort of the sad part about higher education. What could be better? And so we decided that we wanted to talk about it all, about what's working well and what's not working well, what opportunities there are ahead, but what are the stumbling blocks that we see. And so ultimately, Commencement tries really hard, and I think succeeds in telling the full story of higher education now and where it's headed. And it was our hope that this book, and I think we nailed it, is both a love letter to higher education and also a devil's advocate.
And Joe, why don't you talk a little bit about the motivation, but I'm also curious about the style that you took in terms of the approach, in terms of the interviews. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. So first of all, I have to give a shout out to my EdUp co-founder. His name is Elvin Freites. And he, very, very early on when we were doing the podcast, the Ep experience, he said, hey, you know what? We should ask every person that we interview what the future of higher education looks like. And then we can take that someday and we should write a book. And we thought that was just a cool, it started out as a cool idea. And then after that cool idea really started taking shape and you get to interview 100 presidents and you go, how could we not write this book? You know, what's the likelihood? We started asking ourselves these rhetorical questions. What's the likelihood that Pat Cassella goes and listens to the 100 interviews? Probably not that high unless you've started out at the beginning. Sometimes with podcasts, you can feel behind, you know, they're time consuming. You know, we get busy. When we were putting out so many, it would have been hard for somebody to go back and listen to them. I'll ask Kate because she had to do that for the book. But we said, well, if we take those themes and we put them into a book and we can extract those themes, then it won't matter what happens in the future with the podcast. You're jumping in at whatever point. You're already caught up. When you read that book, you could jump in on episode 300 or 500 or 9,000, but you have this foundation for where everything started. And so that's where it came from.
Pat?
No, thank you. That's a good first start right there. My second question gets into the pandemic. So we know the pandemic was really a game changer in the field of education. Many institutions had some experience with online learning, you know, maybe 10 or 20 years, some of the older ones, primarily through, I'd say, a blended model. However, many turned to that complete online model during the crisis, right? In your opinion, what's the difference between a truly online program and one that, you know, had been implemented as an emergency use only, like, right, only pulled the lever in case the building's burning down? And Joe, I'm going to start with you on that one, and then I'd like to hear Kate's comments as well.
It's if I take a program that exists for brick and mortar and I try to put it into an online a Canvas or another LMS and have the exact same learning outcomes and the exact same assignments and the exact same communal factors, it's not going to work because it wasn't designed for that. But if I'm designing a program for online, and I would say even hybrid programs to some degree, where the assignments, the learning communities are built for those who are not ever maybe going to be on a campus. And so you're talking more for an adult student. There's a faster pace. It's on demand. And so you get to choose, is it synchronous online or asynchronous online? So there's choices, choose your own adventure moments that you get to make, but that you design it particularly for the person who may never come to a campus. I think that's a foundational difference. Is I can't take what exists brick and mortar and stick it online. I have to design it for the online audience.
Valid. Kate, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and first of all, I would say also too that, you know, a lot of high school students and undergraduate students who experienced quote unquote online learning for the very first time when it was being done poorly by the institutions they were already connected to, who weren't doing something that was truly pedagogically designed to be online, now have a totally unfair assessment of what online learning is. And I think as an industry in post-secondary education and beyond, we need to be helping sort of reaffirm faith in how powerful and engaging online learning can be and typically is for those students around us who sort of got the sort of short straw on that. I would just say one other thing. I mean, for me, one of the most shocking and really sad moments during the research phase of writing Commencement was when one of our anonymous survey respondents sent in a comment to us that said that he was an IT professional and he had been providing, he was responsible for tech support for online students at their institution, and that in 2021, they eliminated his position because they told him that distance learning was quote unquote no longer needed.
No
Wow.
kidding.
Yeah.
That's a shocker, a little bit of short-sighted view.
Wow.
It's all over the board. That's
Yeah.
it, right? There's the adoption rates, the commitment. You know, you think about now, what does commitment to online learning look like? And there are various levels of commitment.
That's a
Yes,
great
indeed.
observation. Yeah, Dean, I'm going to turn to you for question 3.
Well, I'm going to keep going down this path a little bit. You brought up Kenya and you brought up Western governors who had two very different views of the world. But to keep down that path a little bit, the marketing of online. I think, at least from my old guy perspective, is that I think in the beginning that many of us tried to market it the same. In other words, an online experience versus the face-to-face experience. And I think that was probably true, particularly in the early 2000s and the early parts of the decade. But I doubt if it's that way anymore. And I'd like to hear your positions as marketing experts, and Kate, I'll start with you, about how you market online degrees, online education programs as a university to their potential consumers. Let's start with you.
Yeah, and Joe is in the thick of this, so he'll have a lot to add as well. But I think you have to think about when you're selling an online learning experience, what kind of photography and marketing works for that? And it's not what works for selling an on-campus experience. That doesn't work, right? Because what you're selling in online learning is you're selling the community, you're selling the learning experience, the competencies they're going to develop, the relationships with the professors. That's what you're selling. You're not selling come to our pretty campus. And so everything from the language to the photography to the videos, you have to be thinking about that.
But how do you visually, yourself, how do you visually present online, particularly in terms of presenting it in advertising, marketing to the potential students? What are you trying to say?
Well, the first place I presented is on Google. And to be quite honest, because I think you've got to be present, right? And with an online student, different than a traditional student, the high schools around your area and when this group of students is going to turn 18 and who your market is. And with an online student, it could be years and years. You will never know it until the moment that person decides that they're thinking about going back to school or going to school in the first place. So you have to be present. So that's how I would say. And so for me, it's speed, it's service, right? Because if you believe that a student is a consumer who's making a conscious choice about where they go to school and they're picking a experience or product or whatever label you want to put on it, if you believe that to be true, do you want to be the third company that presents to that customer or the first one? If you want to be the first one, then you have to fashion your operations and you have to fashion your marketing around being student-centric, customer-focused.
Well, immediacy is becoming a big part of that message.
Isn't it for you? I watched a part of, I said this on one of my podcasts the other night. I watched like 15 minutes of a movie and I was like, it's all right. Let me go to a different movie. That's all right. Let me go to a different movie, until I was like, I don't want to watch a movie. I'm going to play a game on my phone. Like 15-minute, 20-minute attention spans. And we're all examples of that. We ask Alexa when we're not sure, or we, flip open our phone.
So folks like Joe not only have to talk to the folks who are ready to be talked to, but they have to figure out how to be there, as he said, sort of be discoverable on digital, but then be like, knock, knock, knock. Like, have you thought about going back to school for that? Right. And that's really hard. And by the way, it's really expensive. I have one client who they have 600 or so graduate programs at their university, and they spend about $1.5 million just in search marketing, just for graduate programs every year.
Wow.
See, I actually think that's not a lot of money. If you said per month, I was going to go, yeah, that makes sense.
Right, exactly. Right. But so the whole game has changed. The entire game has changed. So even having that conversation, right, when you're the head of, enrollment, you're VP over enrollment, or you're the CMO, that conversation with the president and with the board about what the budget needs to look like to attract and then to retain these students it's just a whole new ball of wax.
Right. Patrick.
All right, let's continue along this line of thought here. Joe, Senior Vice President at Lindenwood Global at Lindenwood University. What are some of the challenges associated with starting an online program at a nearly 200-year-old university? I would imagine they are a little bit different than somebody that's just starting up a brand new university to go and deliver online learning.
What I can say about Lindenwood University, however, is that, yes, we had some adoption issues, and it came down to what happens with cannibalization. If you run this program in a faster way for an adult student, how am I going to get any students in my program? And so what happens to my job? And that's okay. We would expect everybody to feel that way. In the end, however, It's a communications tour. It's a learning period to say, we're going to help everybody grow. Rising tide, what is it? Rising tide raises all boats.
Boats, all boats.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that's true. And we've gotten through, because we have amazing faculty and staff here, we've gotten through the growing pains and we're into implementation phases now. But it wasn't easy. And I don't think anybody would tell you it was easy, but those are the problems that you would expect. And we haven't even got to the point where we say, what about this policy? Does that work for Lindenwood Global? And the answer might be no, but there are going to be people that are tied to that policy. How do they let go of it? What does that mean if I let go of it? Does that reduce quality of education? And I do want to say one thing, that online education is not of lesser quality than on ground for anybody that believes that. It is absolutely the same quality, and speed and access can enhance quality, not reduce it.
All right. And did the book help? I mean, did your research for that book influence you creating that program?
You know, it's funny you ask that, because I feel like the only place I haven't written a book is at Lindenwood University, right? People know that I've written it, but, you know, I get people from other higher ed institutions going, wow, this book's amazing. And Lindenwood University, maybe because they see me all the time, they're like, oh yeah, you know.
He's not famous at home. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not famous at home. They're like, you know, this idiot. I know who he is. You know, no. But truly, I think it helped, but nobody would admit it. But you know, in the end, it helped me. It helped me with understanding delivery, understanding the different options that were available to do something like this. Who had gone through it, and there were some, and I reached out to them. You know, Dr. Bill Pepicello, as Kate brought up, he was a great resource for me from the University of Phoenix, having scaled something like this. And what do I need to worry about? And he's been helpful. So there's just been a lot of great feedback. You take all those 125 presidents and you put them in your brain, there's just a lot to pick from.
Right. No, I would imagine. That's thanks for that. Dean, I'm going to turn it over to you for our next question.
Okay, let's move down another segment of students. And I think one of the missing groups, the missing man sort of philosophy, and that has been the students that started universities, men and women, and because of life, dropped out, had to do different things. But their employers are pushing more and more and more about getting more and more of their own employees educated, getting degrees, getting credentials. The interview I did on another series, I heard directly from a president of a major state university saying to me that the governor and his cabinet basically said, you find a way to get 300,000 of my citizens graduated. And I want an answer to that question. And he was going, okay, you know, how much money are you willing to give me? You know, it was a bit of his argument back. But at the same time, it's a legitimate question. And I'm very curious if you have some thoughts about that in terms of how we can get those students, that 25 plus group that want to go back to school, but they haven't quite figured it out yet. What can you suggest to them and to employers and quite frankly, to state government who's showing more and more state interest in trying to find a way to do something about this?
So higher education and industry and the employers have to do their part. And I do believe that public policy folks need to do their part as well. So the secret, I think, is in partnerships between institutions of higher learning and employers. And so, you know, back in the day, I'm one of those folks who, you know, my mom and dad were the kind of people who came out of high school and they went and just got a job somewhere, and you didn't have to have any skills at all. And they taught you everything on the job training, right? And you were able to move from one opportunity to another, and they just kept teaching it to you, and they never made you feel bad for what you didn't know. And you developed a lot of loyalty, and you stayed for 30 years, right? And then I'm of the generation where that didn't exist. So we all had to go to college, and we had to just keep bouncing from job to job every 5 or 10 years to level up. But now we're getting back to institutions saying, we don't want somebody just showing up with some random bachelor's degree in, you know, 20th century American literature or whatever. And we don't know how to apply that. We'd love to teach them what they need to know to excel at our company and to serve our stakeholders. And so we're just seeing more and more institutions of higher learning and employers coming together and saying, how do we build a program or, you know, finesse a program that's perfect for our employees, And by the way, you asked Dean, what can sort of the public policy people or legislators do? They can step up and help and make this more palatable for a lot of folks. So the amount of money that a company can write off as tuition reimbursement that they pay for one of their employees, that level, $5,250, has not changed in it's been like 26 years or something. That IRS tax code needs to be changed. Because if institutions can more affordably help their employees get an education, more of them will do it.
Fascinating. Pat, I think we're running out of time. We got one more question. Joe?
Oh, yeah, we got you. And I'm a product of that co-op program, by the way. Went to school for a term, employer for a term, back and forth. There's a lot of benefits for it. And granted, that was 25, 30 years ago, but it works. It truly does work.
It works.
Yeah, it does. Last question here. I opened up the commencement book, started going through it, looked at some of the quotes, got through the preface, and I see a statement in the beginning that rang about operating for the era in which a university was founded instead of the age for which we now exist would be a fatal mistake, right? I'd note that even focusing on today is a challenge, right? Because it's a moving target. Especially when you look at the introduction of disruptive technologies like ChatGPT, right? So for both of you, I'll start with Joe. What does, and I love this question, I always ask it, what does online learning look like 3 to 5 years from now in higher education? Will there be expansion, consolidation? Start with Joe on this one.
Yeah, a very quick, mergers and acquisitions were those two words, and them together were not something 5 years ago we were really talking about beyond an occasional school closure or whatever. And now it's very, very common that schools are talking about M&A. There's obviously a spectrum of that. So there is going to be some consolidation. You're going to have schools that have traditional student foundation of traditional students looking to acquire possibly or merge with a school who is very, very good at online education, because you can accelerate there faster than starting it fresh. So what it looks like 5 years from now, to answer your question, is significant technology adoption and implementation of AI, of VR, and how we have to move away from, you have a paper due every week, to more engaged learning models for online students.
Kate, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, we even talked to some schools that said, like, we don't put you in a classroom to just get lectured at. Like, that's the part you do. So for hybrid programs, a lot of institutions, that sort of solo reading and watching videos and that type of stuff and threaded discussions, that's what's happening online. And then if there's a classroom portion, that's where their competencies are being tested. That's where the professors know whether they know how to do stuff. It's not about who wrote this paper. And I think it's, offensive for us to assume that students are going to cheat on papers and whatever, even though there are ways to do that. But what does it look like, to Joe's point, for classroom experience, whether it's face-to-face or it's online? How does the time we spend synchronously together become really, really engaging, where we can see who has learned, we can see who's asking great questions, and we can experience that. I think it's great. Our entire book is about the future of higher education, and we drop a lot of hints throughout the book about what Joe and I think the future of higher education looks like. And then, like all good, textbooks, which we hope ours will become for educational degree programs. The answers are in the back, I joke. So Joe and I do, in the epilogue, really go deep into what we believe the future looks like. But to your question about what does the future of online education look like, is not just about serving the students better, it's about serving more students and serving students who otherwise wouldn't be served. And it's about access. It's about it being possible for folks to be able to get an education, on their own terms, the programs they want, no matter where they live. And so I think that distance learning is going to continue to be a key and exciting component of the future of higher education.
Thanks for that, Kate. Boy, we can probably keep talking here for another couple of hours, I would imagine. There's so many great topics here. Hope, I'm going to turn it over to you for conclusion.
Thank you so much. What a fascinating conversation, the new era of online education. Very exciting. Thank you, Kate, Joe, Dean, and Pat. This was indeed fantastic information for our audience. And we look forward to having more conversations with our USDLA community. In fact, you two are going to be at our national conference in July in Orlando. So that is really exciting to keep this conversation going. So folks, this is our March episode of the Distance Learning Roundtable on the Incandescent Radio Network and Incandescent TV. Again, I'm Hope Katz-Gibbs, producer of the show, and it's my privilege to be here with you all. So thank you, and we will talk to you next month when our guest is an amazing educator, and Jennifer, Pat, what's her last name?
Jennifer Williams.
Jennifer Williams. All right. So Jennifer Williams will be next. Thank you all. We'll talk to you soon.